James Thompson had been a royal guard for 12 years. He knew every corner of Buckingham Palace like the back of his hand. The tall, serious man with sharp blue eyes took his job very seriously. He protected the royal family with his life, and everyone respected him for it. On that cold Tuesday morning in November, James was doing his usual rounds. The palace was quieter than normal because most of the senior royals were away on official duties. Only a few staff members and some family members remained in the massive building. As James walked through the long corridors lined with expensive paintings and golden frames, he heard voices coming from the Queen's private sitting room. This was unusual because that room was supposed to be empty. James stopped and listened carefully. His training had taught him to pay attention to everything, even small details that others might miss. The voices were getting louder, and James recognized one of them immediately. It was Camilla, the Queen consort. She sounded angry, which was strange because she was usually calm and controlled in public. James moved closer to the door, staying hidden behind a large marble pillar. "This has gone on long enough." Camilla's voice was sharp and filled with frustration. "I want this handled immediately. No more delays, no more excuses." James felt his heart beating faster. He knew he shouldn't be listening, but something about her tone made him stay. In all his years working at the palace, he had never heard any royal family member speak with such intensity. Another voice responded, but James couldn't recognize it. It sounded like a man, probably middle-aged, speaking in a nervous tone. "Your Majesty, are you absolutely certain about this? Once we move forward, there's no going back." "I've never been more certain about anything in my life," Camilla replied coldly. "The arrangements must be made today. I don't care what it costs or who gets upset. This is what needs to happen." James pressed himself closer to the wall, trying to hear more clearly. His mind was racing with questions. What arrangements was she talking about? Why did she sound so determined and almost threatening? The unknown man's voice came again, even more nervous than before. "But Your Majesty, have you considered the consequences? If this becomes public knowledge, it could cause serious problems for the entire royal family." "Let me worry about the consequences," Camilla snapped. "Your job is to do exactly what I tell you, nothing more. The palace has dealt with scandals before, and we'll handle whatever comes after this too." James felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of scandal was she talking about? He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family. But what if one of them was planning something that could hurt the others? The conversation continued, but James couldn't make out all the words. He heard mentions of money, arrangements, and keeping this quiet. Every word made him more concerned about what he was witnessing. Suddenly, James heard footsteps coming his way. Someone else was walking down the corridor. He quickly moved away from the door and pretended to be checking the windows, as if that was part of his normal security routine. "Good morning, James," said Margaret, one of the senior housekeepers. She was carrying fresh flowers for the rooms. "Morning, Margaret," James replied, trying to sound normal despite his racing heart. "Quiet day today." "Yes, quite peaceful with everyone away," she smiled and continued walking. After Margaret disappeared around the corner, James looked back toward the sitting room. The voices had stopped. He waited a few more minutes but heard nothing else. Then he heard the sound of a door opening and closing, followed by footsteps moving in the opposite direction. James stood there for several minutes, thinking about what he had heard. His mind was full of questions, and he felt confused about what to do next. He had always followed orders without question, but this felt different. Something about Camilla's tone and the secretive nature of the conversation worried him deeply. For the rest of his shift, James couldn't concentrate properly. He kept thinking about the words he had heard. What arrangements was Camilla making? Who was the man she was talking to? And most importantly, was someone in the royal family in danger? As evening approached, James made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't ignore what he had heard. His duty was to protect the royal family, even if that meant investigating one of them. He decided to find out more about Camilla's mysterious meeting and the shocking order she had given. That night, James went home to his small apartment near the palace, but he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his oath as a royal guard and what it really meant. Did protecting the royal family mean staying quiet when one of them might be planning something dangerous? Or did it mean making sure that whatever was happening wouldn't hurt the others? James knew that his next actions could cost him his job, his reputation, and possibly much more. But he also knew that he couldn't live with himself if he did nothing, and something terrible happened later. The weight of what he had overheard was too heavy to carry alone. The next morning, James arrived at the palace earlier than usual. He had barely slept, and his mind was still racing with thoughts about what he had overheard. He decided to do some careful investigating before his regular shift started. James went to the security office and checked the visitor logs from the previous day. He found what he was looking for. A man named David Richardson had signed in to meet with Camilla in her private sitting room. The name meant nothing to James, but he memorized it anyway. During his morning briefing, James acted normally and didn't mention anything about what he had heard. His supervisor, Captain Morris, went through the usual security updates and daily schedules. Everything seemed routine, but James felt like he was carrying a heavy secret. Around 10 in the morning, James was patrolling the East Wing when he saw Camilla walking quickly down the hall. She looked worried and kept checking her phone. This was unusual because she was normally very composed and moved at a steady, royal pace. James followed her at a safe distance, pretending to check doors and windows as part of his security rounds. Camilla went straight to a small office that was rarely used. James positioned himself where he could observe without being seen. Within minutes, the same man from yesterday arrived. James recognized his voice when he spoke to Camilla's private secretary. It was definitely David Richardson. He was a thin man in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit but looking very nervous. This time James couldn't get close enough to hear their conversation clearly, but he could see through a crack in the door that both Camilla and Richardson looked very serious. Richardson was holding a folder full of papers, and Camilla was reading through them carefully. After about 30 minutes, Richardson left the office looking even more nervous than when he arrived. Camilla stayed behind making several phone calls. James could hear her voice through the door but couldn't make out the words. When Camilla finally came out, she looked around carefully before walking away. James noticed that she was carrying the same folder that Richardson had brought. Something important was definitely happening, and James was becoming more convinced that it wasn't good. Later that afternoon, James decided to take a big risk. During his lunch break, he went to the palace library and used one of the computers to search for information about David Richardson. What he found made his blood run cold. Richardson was a private investigator who specialized in sensitive personal matters for wealthy clients. His website was vague, but the few news articles James found painted a clear picture. Richardson was the kind of man rich people hired when they wanted to find dirt on someone or make problems disappear. James felt sick to his stomach. Why would Camilla need a private investigator? Who was she investigating? And what did she plan to do with whatever information Richardson was gathering? The rest of James's shift passed in a blur. He tried to act normal, but his mind was spinning with terrible possibilities. Was Camilla planning to hurt someone in the royal family? Was she trying to find damaging information about King Charles, Prince William, or someone else? That evening, James made another discovery that shocked him even more. He was doing his final security check of the day when he overheard two senior staff members talking in hushed voices. "I can't believe she's actually going through with it," one of them whispered. "Well, she's never liked sharing the spotlight," the other replied. "And now that she's queen consort, I suppose she thinks she can do whatever she wants. But this could destroy everything the royal family has worked to rebuild after all the scandals. That's not our problem. We just follow orders and keep our mouths shut." James's hands were shaking as he listened. The staff members were clearly talking about Camilla and whatever plan she was putting into motion. The mention of destroying everything made James realize that this was much bigger than he had originally thought. When James got home that night, he sat at his kitchen table with a cup of tea and tried to think clearly. He had been a royal guard for 12 years and he had never faced anything like this before. His job was to protect the royal family, but what if one member of the family was planning to harm the others? James thought about King Charles, who had always been kind to the staff. He thought about Prince William and his young family. He thought about all the innocent people who worked at the palace and depended on the royal family for their jobs and their futures. By midnight, James had made his decision. He couldn't stand by and watch while Camilla carried out whatever plan she was making. He had to find a way to stop her, even if it meant risking everything he had worked for. James pulled out his phone and started making a list of people he could trust. The list was short. Most of his fellow guards wouldn't believe him, and even if they did, they wouldn't want to get involved in something this dangerous. The palace staff were too afraid of losing their jobs to speak out against a member of the royal family. But James remembered his training and his oath. Sometimes doing the right thing meant standing alone. He decided that tomorrow he would take the next step in his investigation, no matter how dangerous it might be. He would find out exactly what Camilla was planning, and then he would figure out how to stop her. As James finally went to bed, he knew that his life was about to change forever. He was no longer just a royal guard following orders. He had become something much more dangerous, a man with knowledge that could shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. James woke up with a start at 5 in the morning. He had dreamed about losing his job and being thrown out of the palace in disgrace. But even in his dreams, he knew he was doing the right thing. He got dressed quickly and decided to arrive at work even earlier than yesterday. The palace was almost empty at 6 in the morning. Only the night security guards and a few early shift kitchen staff were around. James used this quiet time to his advantage. He went to the security office and carefully looked through more records from the past few weeks. What he found made his stomach drop. David Richardson had been visiting the palace regularly for almost 2 months. Each visit was logged as private consultation with Camilla. This wasn't a sudden decision. Whatever Camilla was planning, she had been working on it for a long time. James also noticed something else interesting. On the days when Richardson visited, Camilla's regular assistant was always given other duties. Instead, a temporary assistant named Sarah Mills was brought in. James had never seen Sarah around the palace before these meetings. By 7:30, the palace was starting to come alive. James positioned himself in a corridor where he could watch Camilla's private offices without being obvious. He pretended to be checking security cameras and door locks, which was a normal part of his job. At exactly 8 o'clock, Sarah Mills arrived. She was a woman in her 40s with short brown hair and a very professional appearance. She went straight to Camilla's office and began setting up for the day. James noticed that she brought her own laptop and several locked briefcases. 30 minutes later, Camilla arrived looking more stressed than James had ever seen her. She was usually perfectly put together, but today her hair wasn't quite right and she seemed to be in a hurry. She went directly into her office and closed the door. James waited and watched. About an hour later, David Richardson arrived again. This time he brought 2 other people with him, a woman in a business suit and a man carrying a large camera bag. James felt his heart pounding as he realized that whatever Camilla was planning was about to happen. The group stayed in Camilla's office for over 2 hours. James could hear voices occasionally, but he couldn't make out any words. He was getting more and more worried about what they might be discussing. Finally, around noon, the group came out of the office. Richardson looked satisfied, like a man who had just completed a successful business deal. The woman with him was carrying a thick folder, and the man with the camera was putting equipment back into his bag. After they left, James saw Camilla making several phone calls. Even from a distance, he could tell she was agitated. She kept pacing around her office and gesturing with her free hand. James made a decision that could have gotten him fired on the spot. During his lunch break, he went to the cleaning supply closet near Camilla's office and hid behind the shelves. The cleaning staff wouldn't be back until evening, so he knew he wouldn't be disturbed. From his hiding spot, James could hear Camilla's phone conversations much more clearly. What he heard made him realize that the situation was even worse than he had imagined. "Yes, I understand the risks," Camilla was saying to someone on the phone. "But this is the only way to secure my position permanently. Once this information becomes public, no one will question my authority again." There was a pause while the person on the other end spoke. "I don't care what Charles thinks," Camilla continued, her voice getting harder. "By the time he finds out, it will be too late to stop it. The damage will already be done and I'll be the one left standing." James felt like he might be sick. Camilla was planning something that would hurt King Charles, and she didn't care about the consequences. This was much worse than a simple palace scandal. This was a betrayal at the highest level. The conversation continued for several more minutes, but James had heard enough. He quietly left his hiding spot and went to find somewhere private where he could think. James spent the rest of the afternoon trying to act normal while his mind raced with what he should do. He considered going directly to King Charles, but the king was away on official duties and wouldn't be back for 3 days. By then, whatever Camilla was planning might already be finished. He thought about calling the palace's senior security chief. but James wasn't sure if he would be believed. He had no real proof, just overheard conversations and suspicious meetings. And if word got back to Camilla that he was investigating her, she would probably have him fired immediately. As evening approached, James made a risky decision. He decided to try to get more concrete evidence of what Camilla was planning. He knew it was dangerous, but he also knew that he might be the only person in a position to stop whatever was about to happen. That night, James volunteered to work a double shift. This would give him access to the palace during the quiet overnight hours, when he might be able to search for evidence without being caught. By midnight, most of the palace was empty except for the night security guards. James waited until his fellow guards were doing their rounds in other parts of the building. Then he made his way to Camilla's office. The door was locked, but James had master keys as part of his security duties. He opened the door quietly and slipped inside using only a small flashlight to see. His heart was beating so loud he was sure someone would hear it. Camilla's desk was covered with papers, but most of them seemed to be routine correspondence. James looked through the drawers carefully, making sure to leave everything exactly as he found it. In the bottom drawer, he found what he was looking for. There was a folder marked confidential that contained photographs, documents, and what looked like financial records. James's hands were shaking as he realized what he was looking at. The evidence in the folder would destroy several members of the royal family if it became public. James couldn't believe what he was seeing. Camilla had gathered enough damaging information to ruin reputations and possibly even force some royals to step down from their duties. James quickly took pictures of the most important documents with his phone, making sure not to use the flash. He was just putting the folder back when he heard footsteps in the corridor outside. James froze as the footsteps got closer to Camilla's office. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might give him away. He quickly but carefully put the folder back exactly where he had found it and closed the drawer silently. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. James held his breath and waited, pressing himself against the wall behind Camilla's large desk, where he wouldn't be seen if someone looked through the keyhole. After what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, the footsteps moved away. James waited another 10 minutes before carefully opening the door and checking the corridor. It was empty. He slipped out of the office and locked the door behind him, his hands still shaking from the close call. James spent the rest of his night shift trying to process what he had discovered. The photographs and documents he had seen were devastating. They showed financial irregularities, personal scandals, and private information that could destroy several members of the royal family if they became public. But the most shocking discovery was a letter in Camilla's handwriting that outlined her complete plan. She intended to release this information gradually over the next few months, starting with the least damaging items and building up to the most explosive revelations. Each release would make her look more trustworthy and reliable by comparison, strengthening her position as queen consort. The letter also revealed that Camilla planned to use this information to force changes in how the royal family operated. She wanted more control over official duties, more influence over family decisions, and more power over the palace staff. Anyone who opposed her would find their own secrets exposed to the public. James realized that Camilla wasn't just planning to hurt individual family members. She was planning a complete takeover of the royal family's power structure, and she was using their own secrets and mistakes against them to do it. When James finally got home that morning, he sat at his kitchen table and looked through the pictures he had taken with his phone. The evidence was clear and damaging, but he still wasn't sure what to do with it. If he took this information to the police or the press, it would create the biggest royal scandal in decades. The monarchy might not survive the shock, and thousands of people who worked for or supported the royal family would suffer. But if he did nothing, Camilla would slowly destroy the royal family from the inside, using blackmail and threats to control everyone around her. King Charles would become a puppet king, and the other royals would live in fear of having their secrets exposed. James had never felt so alone in his life. He had information that could save the royal family, but using it might also destroy them. He needed help, but he didn't know who he could trust. That afternoon, James made a decision that surprised even himself. He decided to approach someone who had been part of the royal family for much longer than Camilla, someone who would understand the importance of protecting the monarchy, even if it meant taking personal Risks, Princess Anne, the king's sister, was known for being direct, honest, and completely devoted to her royal duties. She was also one of the few people in the family who had never seemed impressed by Camilla's charm. If anyone would listen to James and help him figure out what to do, it would be Princess Anne. James knew this was incredibly risky. If he was wrong about Princess Anne, or if she decided to tell Camilla about his investigation, his career would be over and he might even face legal charges for breaking into Camilla's office. But James also knew that he was running out of time. From what he had overheard and read, Camilla was planning to begin releasing information within the next week. Once that started, there would be no way to stop the damage. James spent hours planning how to approach Princess Anne. He couldn't just walk up to her and start talking about his suspicions. He needed a way to meet with her privately, and he needed to convince her to take him seriously despite the incredible nature of what he was claiming. Finally, James remembered that Princess Anne visited the palace stables every Tuesday morning to check on her horses. She always went alone, and the stables were far enough from the main palace that they could talk without being overheard. On Tuesday morning, James took a deep breath and walked to the stables. Princess Anne was there as expected, brushing one of her favorite horses and talking to it softly. She looked up when James approached, and he could see the surprise in her eyes. "James, isn't it?" she said in her crisp, no-nonsense voice. "You're one of the guards. Is there something wrong?" "Your Royal Highness," James began, his voice shaking slightly. "I need to speak with you about something very important, something that could affect the entire royal family." Princess Anne stopped brushing her horse and looked at James carefully. She had always been good at reading people, and she could see that he was genuinely worried about something serious. "This isn't the usual place for official security briefings, James," she said. "What's this really about?" James took another deep breath. This was the moment that would change everything. Either Princess Anne would listen to him and help save the royal family, or she would think he was crazy and his life as he knew it would be over. "Your Royal Highness," he said quietly, "I have evidence that someone very close to the king is planning to use private information to blackmail and control other members of the royal family. I believe the monarchy itself is in danger." Princess Anne set down her brush and gave James her full attention. The look in her eyes told him that she was taking his words very seriously indeed. "You'd better tell me everything," she said firmly. "And James, this conversation never happened unless I decide otherwise." James nodded and began to tell Princess Anne everything he had discovered about Camilla's shocking plan. Princess Anne listened to James's story without interrupting. Her face remained calm and controlled, but James could see her eyes getting harder as he described what he had overheard and discovered. When he finished talking, she stood in silence for several minutes, thinking carefully about everything he had told her. "These are very serious accusations, James," she finally said. "If what you're telling me is true, then we're facing a crisis that could destroy everything our family has worked to build. But if you're wrong, or if this information becomes public, it could also destroy innocent people." James nodded. "I understand, Your Royal Highness. I've been thinking about that for days, but I couldn't live with myself if I did nothing and something terrible happened to the king or other members of the family." Princess Anne studied James's face carefully. She had always been an excellent judge of character, and she could see that he was telling the truth as he understood it. But she also knew that the situation was far more complicated than it appeared. "Show me the photographs you took," she said quietly. James pulled out his phone and showed Princess Anne the pictures he had taken from Camilla's office. As she looked through them, her expression became grimmer and grimmer. She recognized many of the documents and understood exactly how damaging they could be if they became public. "My God," she whispered when she finished looking at the photos. "She really has been planning this for months. Look at how organized everything is, how carefully she's documented everything." Princess Anne handed the phone back to James and began pacing around the stable, thinking hard about their next move. James waited quietly, knowing that what happened next would determine the fate of the entire royal family. "James," Princess Anne said finally, "what you've discovered is extremely serious. But we have to be very careful about how we handle it. If we move too quickly or make any mistakes, Camilla will realize that we know about her plan, and she might release all the information at once out of desperation." "What do you think we should do?" James asked. "First, we need to get you some protection. If Camilla finds out that you've been investigating her, your life could be in danger. She's clearly willing to destroy anyone who gets in her way." James felt a chill run down his spine. He had been so focused on protecting the royal family that he hadn't really thought about the personal danger he might be facing. Princess Anne continued, "Second, we need to warn the other family members without alerting Camilla. That means we have to be extremely careful about who we talk to and how we approach them." "Should we tell the king?" James asked. "Charles needs to know, but he's not due back from his official trip for 2 days. We can't risk calling him because palace phone calls are sometimes monitored. We'll have to wait until he returns and then find a way to meet with him privately." Princess Anne paused and looked directly at James. "James, I want you to understand something. What we're about to do could end both of our careers and possibly land us in prison if we're wrong, or if things go badly. Are you absolutely certain you want to continue with this?" James thought about everything he had seen and heard over the past week. He thought about his oath as a royal guard and his duty to protect the royal family, even from threats that came from within. "Yes, Your Royal Highness. I'm certain. This is what I swore to do when I became a guard." Princess Anne smiled for the first time since their conversation began. "Good. Then here's what we're going to do." Over the next hour, Princess Anne and James worked out a detailed plan. They would continue monitoring Camilla's activities while being extremely careful not to let her know she was being watched. They would gather more evidence if possible, and they would prepare to expose her plan before she could carry it out. Princess Anne also gave James a special phone number that would connect him directly to her private line, bypassing all the normal palace communication systems. If he discovered that Camilla was about to move forward with her plan, he could warn Princess Anne immediately. "There's one more thing," Princess Anne said as they prepared to leave the stables. "I'm going to arrange for you to be temporarily reassigned to different duties. It will look like a normal rotation, but it will actually get you away from Camilla's immediate area, so you'll be safer while we figure out our next move." James felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. He was glad to have Princess Anne's help, but he also realized that they were now involved in something that could have consequences far beyond anything he had imagined when he first overheard Camilla's conversation. That afternoon, James received official notice that he was being temporarily assigned to security duties at a royal residence outside London. The assignment would begin the following week, giving him time to finish his current duties and prepare for the transfer. James knew this was Princess Anne's doing, but he also worried about being away from the main palace when so much was happening. However, he trusted Princess Anne's judgment and knew that she was trying to protect him. For the next few days, James continued his normal duties while being extra careful to avoid any situations where he might accidentally encounter Camilla. He also paid close attention to any conversations or activities that might give him more information about her timeline. On Thursday evening, James overheard 2 staff members talking about preparations for a major announcement that Camilla was planning to make the following week. They didn't know what the announcement was about, but they had been told to prepare the main reception room for a gathering of journalists and photographers. James immediately called Princess Anne on the special phone number she had given him. When she answered, he could hear the tension in her voice. "It's starting," James said simply. "I know," Princess Anne replied. "Charles returns tomorrow and we need to act immediately. Meet me in the same place tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock. And James, be very careful. I have a feeling that things are about to get much more dangerous for all of us." James arrived at the stables at exactly 6 o'clock on Friday morning. Princess Anne was already there, looking more serious than he had ever seen her. She had clearly been awake most of the night, planning their next move. "Charles returned late last night," she said without any greeting. "I managed to speak with him privately for a few minutes, and I told him we needed to meet urgently this morning. He's agreed to come here at 7 o'clock before his official duties begin." James felt his stomach tighten with nerves. In 1 hour, he would be face to face with the King of England, accusing the Queen Consort of planning to blackmail and destroy the royal family. If this went wrong, he would probably spend the rest of his life in prison. "How did the king react when you told him?" James asked. "He was shocked, of course, but he's learned to trust my judgment over the years. Charles knows that I would never make accusations like this unless I was absolutely certain they were true." At exactly 7 o'clock, King Charles arrived at the stables. He was dressed casually and looked tired from his trip, but his eyes were alert and serious. James had seen the king many times during his 12 years as a guard, but he had never been in such an intimate setting with him. "James," the king said, extending his hand for a handshake, "Anne has told me a little about what you've discovered. I want to hear the full story from you directly." For the next 30 minutes, James told King Charles everything he had seen, heard, and discovered about Camilla's plan. He showed the king the photographs on his phone and explained how all the pieces fit together to form a comprehensive scheme to take control of the royal family. King Charles listened without interrupting, but James could see the pain and disbelief in his eyes as he realized what his wife had been planning behind his back. When James finished speaking, the king sat in silence for several long minutes. "I can't believe Camilla would do something like this," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've had our disagreements, but I never imagined she would try to destroy the family to increase her own power." Princess Anne placed a gentle hand on her brother's shoulder. "Charles, I know this is painful, but we have to act quickly. According to James, she's planning to begin releasing information as early as Monday. We have less than 3 days to stop her." King Charles looked up at both of them with determined eyes. "What do you recommend we do?" Princess Anne had clearly been thinking about this question all night. "We have 2 choices. We can confront Camilla directly and try to convince her to abandon her plan, or we can expose her plan publicly before she can carry it out." "If we confront her," James said, "she might just move up her timeline and release everything immediately out of spite. But if we expose her publicly," King Charles said, "it will create a huge scandal and damage the monarchy anyway." The 3 of them stood in the stable, each lost in thought about the impossible choice they were facing. Finally, King Charles spoke again. "There might be a 3rd option," he said slowly. "What if we give Camilla a chance to leave quietly with her dignity intact, but make it clear that we know about her plan and won't allow it to continue?" Princess Anne shook her head. "That's too risky, Charles. What's to stop her from taking the information with her and releasing it after she leaves?" James had been listening to this conversation with growing anxiety. But suddenly he had an idea that might solve their problem. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "what if we could get the original documents away from her before she realizes we know about her plan? If she doesn't have the evidence anymore, she can't release it." King Charles and Princess Anne both looked at James with interest. "How would we do that?" Princess Anne asked. "I still have access to her office as part of my security duties. If I could get in there tonight and remove all the evidence, she would wake up tomorrow with nothing to release. By the time she realizes what happened, we could confront her with our own evidence of what she was planning." King Charles was nodding slowly. "That could work, and it would give us leverage to negotiate her departure quietly, without creating a public scandal." Princess Anne looked worried. "James, that's extremely dangerous. If you're caught, Camilla will know immediately that we're onto her and she'll probably have you arrested for theft." "It's a risk I'm willing to take," James said firmly. "This is why I became a royal guard in the first place, to protect the royal family even from threats that come from within." After much discussion, they agreed on the plan. James would enter Camilla's office that night and remove all the evidence of her,